Welcome to CTV News. I'm Keith Petrusek, and tonight we'll be starting our program off with a special documentary in our Canadian History Moments series. Reporter Brett Abram will be taking an in-depth look at the liberation of the Netherlands in World War II.
1940, the Nazis invaded the Netherlands at 3:55 a.m. The Nazis launched a major aerial assault on the west coast of the Netherlands, where their main populations laid, including the cities of Rotterdam and Amsterdam, which were heavily bombed. During this attack, the Germans dropped 10,000 men onto the ground and began fighting the very weak and small Netherlands army. Within days, they had taken the Netherlands, and then the rest of their army was able to just walk across the eastern border to control the Netherlands. John and Georgina Huizinga were residents of the Netherlands who lived there during World War II. John, whose father was based in The Hague, another very populated place in the Netherlands, witnessed bombings of Rotterdam from the distance. This is what he had to say.
No, I see in 1940, I see the Germans land, and I see Rotterdam burn. They bombed Rotterdam all to pieces, and there's about maybe 50 miles or 40 miles from The Hague, and at night you see Rotterdam all in flames.
In the fall of 1944, the Allied forces planned a major aerial assault on the German-Dutch border, called Operation Market Garden. Their plan was to take 8 bridges along the canal system separating the two countries. If they were successful, they could, right then and there, liberate the Netherlands and then walk into Germany and end the war by the end of 1944. Unfortunately, the Allies were heavily outarmed in the air and lost the battle. In February 1945, the Allied forces who had lost during Operation Market Garden joined Canadian troops in the south of Holland. Their mission? To free the southern part of Holland by crossing the Rhine River. This was very dangerous, though. The Germans had breached the dikes holding back the river water, and the water was now flooding low-lying areas and forcing troops into tight areas where they could easily be fired at. The battle raged on for just over a month, and on March 23, 1945, the Allied forces were able to cross the river, but with very heavy losses. In 1945, over 200,000 Canadian soldiers were in the Netherlands. They began fighting in the east side of the country and were moving north, trying to take over the rural regions from the German soldiers. After a while, they also began to fight in the west side of the country, where their main populations laid. Canadians started to fight house to house to take cities, and in some cases actually took cities within 2 days. Early in May, the Canadian troops had to stop, as there was threats from desperate German soldiers that the dikes protecting the major cities from ocean water would be breached. During this pause, Canadians negotiated with German soldiers to end their reign in the Netherlands. They also took this time to give support to those Dutch citizens who had struggled through the harshest winter of the war. On May 5, 1945, the Germans surrendered the Netherlands to the Canadian soldiers. So, what country liberated your villages where you guys lived?
Canadians.
Canadians.
That's something we'll never forget.
Oh, yeah, so
I was going to, I came home after all these parties were going on after the war, and I told my parents, I was all of a, at the point, I was 9 years old, I was going to marry a Canadian. And I did.
Yes, I did.
During World War II, the Dutch royal family was evacuated to the United Kingdom. Even when there, they were rumored not to be safe, so the Queen, Beatrice, and her 2 daughters moved to Ottawa, where they would live for the remainder of the war. While in Ottawa, major controversy shook as the Queen became pregnant. No Dutch royal family member could become heir to the throne if they are born in a foreign country. To help the Dutch with this situation, the Canadians made the room where they were living part of the Netherlands. Because of this, the Dutch will never forget the Canadians. Every year since, they have sent 20,000 tulip bulbs to Ottawa, where they can be seen every spring. May 5th, 1945. That's the date Dutch people will never forget, because that's the day that us Canadians liberated them. Every 5 years after that, the Dutch would always celebrate May 5th as Liberation Day. And in 1990, the Dutch government made sure that Liberation Day would be celebrated every year. It would be a national holiday. On May 5th now, Dutch people always go to concerts, cultural events, and exhibitions, and celebrate not only their own freedom, but what the Canadians did for them. Canadians were the ones that liberated you guys. What is the belief in Holland and of you guys, of Canadians?
Now that is a little, you know, the Canadians liberated us. Oh, we thought, you know, I probably had never heard of Canadians before all this happened, but the Canadians did liberate us, and yeah, we thought the Canadians were just wonderful.
Yeah. We have visited the Canadian the cemeteries in Arnhem, where hundreds of Canadian soldiers in America, all the Canadians are buried, and it was something awesome. The rows of white crosses, and so well kept. The school children in Holland keep the graves after the soldiers.
Well, that was a very well done and interesting report, Brent.
Why, thank you, Keith.
How was it talking to someone that has experienced the liberation firsthand?
It was really cool because, you know what, you can read a book, you can go on the internet, but you're only scratching the surface when you do those things. When you talk to someone who's been there, they've done that, they have that experience, you get the fine details, and that's what really builds knowledge.
Well, I found it quite interesting myself, Brent.
Thank you, Keith.
That concludes this segment of CTV News. Now here's sports with Robbie Robertson.